It's a great pleasure and honor to be here to watch the continuation of the growth of AsiaTEFL. I knew the organization when it was just a dream in the mind of Professor Lee. And since then, it's moved. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in India again. Recently, I was there with two of my grandsons and even at Matra, so that I know where I should be if it weren't for the pandemic. Now, 10 years ago, at a meeting, the 9th AsiaTEFL International Conference, I gave a paper on teaching English in a changing Asia. And the question that I want to ask today is, has in fact Asia continued to change, and where are we up to? To find out something about this, I looked at a recent book by Kingsley Bolton called The Handbook of Asian Englishes, and at an essay on the state of English proficiency.
ちょっと聞いてるから、ちょっと今バーナー・スポーツキーが始まっちゃったから、バーナー・スポーツキー講演が先食べてる？ああ、だったんだけど、どうもよくわかんなくて。
マイクミュート、ミュートマイクフォン、please.
Can you mute?
Oh dear. Sorry. Okay. No, I lost my screen sharing. I'll try again.
この人ね、バーナーズ・スポーツキーってイスラエルのね、アメリカ人なんだけど、
小池先生、マイクミュートしてください。
リーダーなんだよね。お、小田さんも出てきたね、これ。ほら。
Professor Koike, could you turn the microphone off?
Can't, I can't understand what you're doing, what I'm doing.
You're talking.
let me explain to him, Bernard.
わからないんですよ、言い方が。
小池先生、全世界、マイク全世界に声が聞こえてます。
これでいいのかな？
マイクの一番左のところを押してください。
マイク一番左？
一番下に、画面の一番下の一番左。
ミュートですか？
ミュート。
ミュート押すんですか？
はい。Okay, Bernard.
Okay.
Okay, Bernard, heads off.
Right. Now, this article tries to estimate the situation of English in Asian nations. And I'm not sure how accurate it is. I'll have something to say about that. But the critical presentation claims what is the percentage of the population that knows English. I put "know" in inverted commas because I'll say again later, we're not quite sure what it means to know English. And you'll see the range from the group that are under 10% to Singapore, which claims to be close to 80% of the population. Whether that's accurate or not, I'm not saying. And essentially, what I would ask is, if I make statements about your country, that you disagree with, please write to me so that the written version will deal with and make corrections to this. Essentially then, percentage of population that knows English, or a hierarchy based on international examination scores, or people studying in English-speaking countries, ranging once again from Singapore, at this time down to Laos. All right, now that's a sort of an overall presentation of the situation. Clearly, the British colonies, the former British colonies, towards the top of the list, because as Professor Kapoor pointed out, the occupation of India, of Asia, the British colonies, introduced the language to those countries in greater, to a greater extent than it did to the others. There are three other countries, though, two other countries that have English as an official language. The Philippines, which was under American colonization, and Macau with its industry, its that has many visitors, and so good reasons for English. But I unusually prepared this paper before, and having heard Professor Kapoor this morning, I need to add some important comments. I was very impressed to hear his concerns about English interfering with the local culture, with jeans and McDonald's replacing curry and saris, and interfering with language. He cited Macaulay, and Macaulay's 19th century paper is important, but interestingly enough, if you look at it, Macaulay ignored the local languages, and what he worried about was the use of Sanskrit and Arabic in the as language of instruction in the schools that there were in India at the time. In my own study of language policy, it seemed to me that the threat to small languages came from the middle-sized rather than the global languages. Some of you will know the famous picture of the fish eating each other. It's the big fish that eats the medium-sized fish, but the medium-sized fish is the one that beats and eats the smaller fish, so that the many local languages are threatened not by English as much as they are by local languages. Going on, I say again that the percentages that I quoted before are estimates based on various surveys. Whether we can trust them completely, I don't know. And also, it's very difficult to know what is meant by know English. Does it mean they can speak it or read it? Does it mean they can understand or write it? Does it mean they learned it at school as a foreign language, as a second language, as a language of instruction? From what grade? And what sort of English do they speak? Does it mean the standard English or the Singlish or whatever local variety that is developed? There is an important consideration when we talk about the colonial influence. One of the questions that has been asked is, how did the imperial language, whether it's English and or French or Portuguese, survive independence? Well, first of all, during the colonial period, it was, as Professor Kapoor said, institutionalized in schools and businesses and government offices, and therefore it was easier to continue to use the colonial language than to switch to the local new independent language of the independent country. Secondly was the fact that the local languages, including any new official language, needed to be modernized to deal with the situation. The third feature is something called elite closure. The elite, who were often leaders of the independence movement and the new government, had been well trained in the colonial language, and they maintained their power in the government of the independent country through their proficiency in English or in the imperial language, and so had no reason to encourage the switch. And finally, the economic issue was extremely important. Speakers of the imperial language got better jobs, had more wealth. Language is a positional good. That's to say, you need to be in the highest group to get the benefit from knowing it. The economic value of a global language then is for jobs. I just give you the example. My daughter is CEO of a startup company here in Israel. Most of her employees are Palestinians, but she needs engineers to know enough English to speak with similar engineers in the United States to do their job properly. And obviously that's at one level, the higher level, but also with the development of telephone centers around the world, knowledge of English has become particularly valuable. And secondly, as Professor Kapoor pointed out, you need English for education because schools tend to move towards English. The universities seem to prefer English for teaching science and engineering, and there are more and more English. There's more and more English used in countries where the native language is different. And finally, there is the suggestion that English brings with it culture, whether it's the high culture of literature or the low culture of the McDonald's and the jeans, that also has considerable value. Now, it turns out that the chart on language proficiency more or less agrees with the chart on economic strength. The greater the economic strength of a country, the more it can afford to teach English. And the poorer countries naturally find it particularly difficult to hire good teachers, develop good materials, give time to the teaching of the global language. So economic strength is also a major factor in accounting for success in the teaching of English. Also, of course, the choice of an official language. India, you will recall, at independence, decided that English was no longer to be official, that after 10 years it should be faded out. It turned out not to be the case. And as we heard, English is now an official language in India as well. Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, all considered, Brunei, all considered English as an official language or as a national language, and that gave it greater strength in those countries. Then there was the English language teaching industry. Huge amounts of money to support the teaching of languages that are not well enough taught in the school system, in the state system. For instance, Wall Street English claims that it has 420 centers in 29 territories, including China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia, Myanmar, and South Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. It was sold for $300 million in 2017, but in 2020, it was sold at a deep discount because of the COVID-related drop in Chinese sales and competing local firms. Duolingo is valued now at 2.4 billion, has filed for initial US public offering. There is an enormous language teaching business filling the gaps left by state systems. Now let me talk about individual countries. Again, remember that I am relying on published material, and if you have reasons to disagree with me, I would be grateful if you would write. Now, Laos, we're starting at the lower end. Laos is in the lowest level of English proficiency and of English study, even though it's quite reasonable in terms of income. It's a former French colony. Lao is the official language, but there is, as in many of the French colonies, a move towards English. On the other hand, people can claim that the low behavior in English classes suggests that it is not really appreciated by all the students. Indonesia is also at a low level in proficiency, but has done a major job in establishing its national language, Bahasa Indonesia, which is now official with large local varieties. It went through a period of Dutch and Japanese colonialism, but according to one particular source, English has become the second language of Indonesia, craving the use of English. Whether that's still true, I don't know, but I'd be interested to hear. Myanmar, also a little bit higher, with Burmese the official language, but not a wealthy country. However, the results show that English language is essential for government officials to execute their duties and responsibilities at all levels. That again makes English important. Cambodia is another country that a former French colony. Its official language is Khmer. It's not a wealthy country, and it's shifting from French to English as a major foreign language, major second language. The internationalization of Cambodia, particularly its membership in an economic alliance, has caused a demand for English language proficiency that's shown in national policy documents and university level job and scholarship notices. The question then, to what extent is that going to lead to an increase in proficiency? Japan moved up to the next level, a reasonably wealthy country. Japanese is obviously official. The country is theoretically monolingual. But what is happening is that scientists need to speak English. More research careers in Japan need English. More or less, the push for English is there. Nepal is in a lower level. A former British colony is the lowest in terms of income. The official language, of course, Nepali. There's not great strength in internet. There's limited skill in internet among teachers and students. And so it's very hard to develop technology in the system, with the result that during the lockdowns, probably the teaching of English is suffering severely. Thailand, interesting country, because it claims that everybody speaks Thai. In fact, it turns out that people in Thailand speak lots of different varieties of Thai, some of which cannot understand each other. And also in the South, the fact that they speak varieties of Malay has led to enormous problems. Thailand is trying to adopt the common European framework for the teaching of languages. It shows the difficulty of taking a model developed for Europe and trying to apply it in Asia. And that's why I was particularly happy to see the presentation of the group led by Professor Wen and Professor Oda to try and develop an Asian curriculum model. Macau, small island state with good reasons and casinos, former Portuguese colony. Mandarin and Portuguese are both official. And while there's a strong demand for practical English, that means adopting the curriculum from the standard old-fashioned teaching of grammar and reading literature to something that will help people in getting jobs. Bangladesh, a former British colony, and remember that the breakaway from Pakistan came for language reasons. Bengali is official, and it was in order to make it official that Bangladesh broke away from Pakistan, but it's not doing particularly well. English, I'm told, is a kind of monolingual country, and English remains a foreign language rather than the second language. Now, the People's Republic of China has had a very strong, centrally controlled language policy. And up until a number of years ago, it was clear that there was a strong movement for to develop proficiency in English. At the same time, there were the major strength, the major policy push was for Putonghua, for Mandarin. The rapid economic growth gave the possibility of developing English. On the other hand, interestingly enough, one notes in China the same movement as we heard in Professor Kapoor's address. Education authorities in Shanghai, the most cosmopolitan city in the country, last month forbade local elementary schools to hold final exams on the English language. In other words, there is starting to be the push towards national language rather than global language, and that will obviously affect the teaching of English. Taiwan, with its official Mandarin Chinese and its unwillingness to do very much for the local indigenous languages, seems to realize that there's a necessary to develop teacher education programs, the development of bilingual all English programs within departments, teacher training institutes to cooperate, and opportunities, training and teaching opportunities for foreign students. Sri Lanka, again, a former British colony, with its official Sinhala and Tamil, was dominated for a while by English education, but the local rulers have attempted to diminish the importance of English in the post-colonial period and strengthen the teaching of the national language, Sinhala. Vietnam, another country with French formerly as its foreign language, colonial language, has now tried to adopt the common European framework as a policy because of the need to reform higher education and improve the economic and political situation, and to look outward for solutions to domestic solutions, so that English looks like having strong support as Vietnam changes its emphasis. South Korea, with 10% English proficiency, Korean the official language, elementary school education, testing of English has had a major effect on motivation to learn the language, so that there's a large industry, which obviously AsiaTEFL benefits from, and a push, which, I mean, the fact that AsiaTEFL was founded by South Korea is a sign of the enthusiasm for the language. Hong Kong is going through obviously a major change. a former British colony with a very, very high level of English in numbers of speakers, is facing the new situation with the pressure to switch from the local Cantonese and other Chinese languages to Mandarin, which will, with the new policy adopted by China, probably put emphasis on the teaching of Mandarin rather than the maintenance of the level of English. The Philippines, a former American colony with both Filipino and English official, it's probably the number of overseas people who learn English when they go overseas for their jobs and then come back bringing what they earned and bringing their knowledge of English. That means that English has become extremely important. The question is, will they demand standard Philippine English rather than the local varieties? Malaysia, a former British colony with Bahasa Melayu official and English recognized, it's not clear that there is, English is an urban language. It's weak in the countryside, poor infrastructure, limited resources. Major changes are needed to improve that area. Brunei, a former British protectorate, has Malay as the official language. English and Chinese, both widely used. High percentage young Bruneians are competent multilinguals who hold English in high regard. And many of them claim that English is the language in which they are most proficient. India, very high in English proficiency, a former British colony, not a wealthy country, but a growing country. English is recognized an official language, but there's government pressure for Hindi and strong local pressures for the state languages like Tamil, Gujarati. English in India, we're told, is a symbol of people's aspirations for quality in education, fuller participation in national and international life. English is seemed to be demanded by everyone from the very beginning, although Professor Kapoor has pointed out the movement, the counter movement that's starting to emerge quite some time after independence, as the nationalist feeling, the movement towards Hindi is pushing the language policy. Pakistan, a former British colony with Urdu and English both official, but there are very few native speakers of either the official languages. Limited use of technology due to shortages of resources, lack of tools, and lack of teacher training. Singapore, a former British colony, close to the highest level of income, a strong language management concern, but the argument is, even though English is recognized, is the English that is spoken there standard English or a local variety called Singlish? And the government, which tries to deal with that problem and worries about the direction that English, the knowledge of English is taking. Summing up then, what do we have? The important explanations of strong English, former English-speaking colonization, or in the case of the French colonies, the European colonization, now shifting to English, the importance of economic development, the support for education and the globalization, the increasing demand for English for jobs, which raises the standard of the language. The question remains then, are the resources for the educational system adequate to meet the demands? Are teachers well enough trained and effective? Why is there such a big English teaching industry showing the unfilled demand? Essentially then, I'm happy to be associated with AsiaTEFL that's working towards filling this gap. And thank you for the grandfather of a future multilingual great-grandfather, actually. And if he's lucky, he'll finish up with Hebrew, English, and Portuguese as his languages. And obviously, that's a great benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Spolsky. We have 5 minutes time left. If at all there are going to be any queries or any comments, then we can, if you permit us, we can take up 1 or 2 questions if possible.
Can I ask, sir? Can I ask?
Sure, but be very precise. Yes.
Is it big opportunity to ask question?
Yes, please do, but be very precise, very brief. Please ask.
Oh yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for the opportunity you has given me. I'm Achun Nasir from Indonesia. It is very interested to Mr. Bernard, Professor Bernard's presentations. I'm interested. I would like to ask, did your research identify also some factors that some countries has a low level of now English, such as I see in your paper just now, Indonesia, one of the country that only 10% people who know English. My question is, do you provide also some factor that some factors that make Indonesians one of the low level who know English? And the last one, if you don't mind, could you share your, if you don't mind, could you share us your materials to my email? My email will, I would like to share in chat box later on. Prof, thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Professor Spolsky, would you like to?
What I have been interested in, whoops, there's the picture of the language.
Yeah.
Indonesia strikes me as a very interesting case. It's been more successful than most in re-establishing a language, a national language. Bahasa Indonesia is obviously a great achievement for a country that had so many, that has so many different languages. I suspect that part of the reason for the low level in English is the amount of energy that had to go into establishing Indonesian. as a language. I wish I knew more about it. I'm impressed by what I've read.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bernard, for your presentations.
One on the chat box. In the chat box, there is one observation there that more and more students from Southeast Asia countries are coming over to Singapore to study, to be proficient in English in private schools, spending lots of money so that they could migrate to the West or to the Australia
Wonderful. Yes.
to work or live in future. It's really a phenomenon since the turn of the century.
Essentially, in my new book, I start off my study of language policy with the individual, because I realize that whatever national policies are, it's individuals who make the decisions. Now, I got that out of two things, that emphasis on the individual. One was a grandson of mine who refused to switch to Hebrew at the home with his two older brother and sister when they went to school, and insisted on keeping up English for quite some years. An individual who decided for himself what he wanted. And the other thing is the study, particularly in Czechoslovakia, by the Prague School people, of the individuals who make an effort to learn a language of their own, a foreign language that's not taught well enough in the system. Now, obviously, the people going to Singapore, I presume a lot of them from Korea, but wanting to make sure that they can learn, that their children will learn the language, and not expecting the local system to do the job. I think that and the strength of the language teaching industry is another sign of the way in which individual demands are ignoring the national policies, which makes it a particularly interesting, complicated topic to study.
Thank you, Professor Spolsky.